Hello and welcome back to our Intermediate Financial Accounting class. This is our discussion of the conceptual framework. Up to this point we've talked about where financial accounting fits in, we've talked about the objectives of financial reporting, we've talked about GAAP and where it comes from, where the legal authority comes from, and where we can find GAAP. Now we're going to transition in and talk about, well, how do we actually get GAAP? How does FASB go through the process of setting the rules? And that's where this next discussion leads us to. So again, here's our set of specific rules, okay, or the specific process that FASB goes through. But again, I think it'll be better if we use a picture. Hopefully you're not getting too tired of my artistic attempts, okay. But basically we start off with FASB deciding that something needs to be talked about. And when that happens, they put it on their agenda. And they have several items always on their agenda that they're working on. And once they put it into their agenda, then they create what they call a discussion memorandum. Discussion memorandum, which basically is a short discussion of the fact that, hey, we think we need to talk about this, here's why we think it's an issue, here's kind of what we're thinking about doing. Okay? Now once they do that, once they put out their discussion memorandum, by the way, will also include kind of a tentative rule. This is what we're thinking about that will address the problems that caused us to put it on the agenda. Once they do that, then they have what they call roundtable discussions. So they allow a bunch of different people to come in and talk with them, and they can make comments and suggestions, and this is what we think, and this is what we want, and people send in letters and comments, all sorts of things, to FASB. And at that point, once they've gotten all that feedback, then FASB creates what they call an exposure draft. And it's usually pretty thick, because this is the draft, exposure draft. Okay, this is the idea, right? We've gone through all your comments, we've gone through all the letters, we've done some studies, we've talked to you. This is what we think the rule should be. And some people like the idea, and they say, yes, that's great, keep doing that. We have others that just absolutely hate it, don't you dare. Okay, people will send in letters, and people send in other messages and discussions as well, all giving feedback on that exposure draft. So basically, it's almost like we start again. We have another set of roundtables, another set of comments, and once FASB gets all of that information, then they go back to the drawing board. Sometimes they start fresh, or they do a total rewrite. Sometimes it's just a tweak, but they take all of that idea, all of those ideas that they've been given, and they issue the standard. And this is it. This is GAAP. And there are always some people who are just thrilled. It's a big smile. That's a big smile. Okay? And there are other people who are just shocked that that's what the rule ended up being. Okay? And that's the way it is, right? But this is the rule until FASB addresses the matter again. So this is the process. It's a long process. It can take years. Sometimes they can do it really, really fast if there's popular opinion on their side. But usually this is a very, very long process. And I'd like to say that it really came down and gave us the very best GAAP available, but unfortunately it doesn't work that way. There's a lot of politics involved in this process. My favorite example of the politics is actually the rule about stock options. A couple decades ago, before even I got started in accounting, really, FASB came out and said, you know, we really need to set a rule that makes people disclose the expense of stock options. Let me say it right. We need to set a rule that makes people expense their stock options and put it on the financial statement and show that obligation. And companies just freaked out. You can't do that. You'll ruin our business. All these tech firms, that's what we do most of. If we have to expense it, we'll go bankrupt, and all of the tech industry will move overseas. And Congress came in and said, if you try to do this, we will take over GAAP. And FASB went, whoa, don't take over GAAP. That's fine. We'll back off. We'll change the rule to you can either expense it or disclose it. Put it in the footnotes. So instead of putting it on the income statement, you can put it in the footnotes. And companies were like, okay, that's fine. And everybody put them in the footnotes. Well, about a decade later, they tried again. Everybody freaked out again, so they backed off. And then Enron happened. Okay, so they tried up to Enron. Enron happened. Now, it's been about 20, 30 years since they first tried. Okay, probably about 20 years. And then Enron happened. And when Enron happened, they said, okay, That's it. You have to expense your stock options now. And everyone went, okay, because they didn't dare argue. There was such a public outcry for better rules and better disclosures that no company wanted to be seen as the company that wasn't going to play by the rules and provide the information investors wanted. And FASB got it through, and we all often see that. There'll be a little disaster, not big enough to replace the standard setting body, but there'll be a little disaster, and FASB will get a bunch of rules through because nobody dares to argue with them. So it is a political process. We do the best we can, and try to move things forward, but there is some of that where the politics get involved, and you'll see that every once in a while as we go through a rule. You'll just kind of scratch your head and say, "Wow, really? Yeah, really. That's what FASB has come up with. It's a compromise for now, and hopefully in the future we'll be able to make it a little bit better." Okay? But things are changing right now. Right now we're working on something called convergence with IFRS. The idea is that we want to merge our standard setting with their standard setting and get one set of rules. Okay? Now this has been a big issue for a long time. Whether it'll keep being an issue or not, I don't know. But that's something that we are certainly working towards. Okay, with convergence. Already, for several years, the SEC has been allowing companies following IFRS, if they're following all of IFRS, to list on the U.S. exchanges without any kind of reconciliation to U.S. GAAP. Now, I remember vividly sitting in my very first bookkeeping class back in high school, listening to a presentation about IFRS and thinking, this will never, ever, ever, ever happen. The U.S. will never give up its authority to set GAAP. And all of a sudden we're in the middle of it. So things have changed a lot since I started studying accounting. That's where we're at, right, as we're moving towards this convergence process. All of the bodies ostensibly say, we want this change. So you've got FASB, that's one of the groups, and they're saying, yes, we need to converge. You have IASB, that's the International Accounting Standards Board, and they're saying, yes, we should converge. And the SEC, they're saying, maybe, in 2013, they did this huge study, produced this big document, and the document was, maybe, I mean, really, that's how it read, if you went through it, is that maybe this is a good idea. So ostensibly, we want to change, but it's not changing as much as we might have hoped. Now, there are a lot of companies who have, not companies, there are a lot of countries who have already changed. The European Union, Canada, China, well, let me show you, it'll be easier. This is a map, and it's a couple years old. This is back from 2004. This was the Convergence Map, and you can see all these countries that are in yellow had already switched to IFRS. All the ones in blue were thinking about it. All the ones in orange, us in Canada, were saying, maybe we're thinking about it. And then you have those who really aren't even thinking about it at this point. Okay? In 2008, 4 years later, the map looked like this. You can see how much of the world, even in 2008, had already changed to IFRS or had a specific date that they were going to change. Those are the ones in blue. And then there was us and Colombia, and that was it. Okay, and it was a great support to know that Colombia was on our side. But anyway, that's kind of where we're at. It's still, most of the world is converted or converting or allowing IFRS. But there's just a couple of holdouts. U.S. being the biggest holdout, we're moving on convergence instead of conversion. So we don't just want to switch to IFRS, we want to kind of mush with it, okay, and create one standard everybody's happy with. You've got some other countries since then. Japan has kind of slowed down a little bit, saying that the U.S. isn't going to change, maybe we won't either. So we'll see. It's still very much a work in process. IASB started as the International Accounting Standards Committee. They started back in 1973. Okay, in 2001 they restructured. What you need to know with this, just a quick timeline here. Right, 1973 was the big year where we started, and really what we had was something very much like the cap. And the rules were so loose during this period before that 2001 change that you could actually be following. Sorry, it's a C. Okay, International Accounting Standards Committee, where you could actually be following IFRS and completely in line with your own home country GAAP. So you could be following both, no problem. Okay, that changed in 2001. Just like we went from the CAP to the APB, much more formal. the change from the IASC to the IASB also switched to a more formal standard setter that has set much better rules. At first, these standards, like I said, were really easy to follow. And basically, the idea was, well, you had the gold standard of GAAP, US GAAP, and then you had IFRS that was okay, but not really that great. What we're seeing now, as we do studies about how investors see the information, we've found that now they're really on par. And these two are better than just about any other GAAP in the world, but they're equal. And so US GAAP has really lost its place as the head, okay, of standard setters. Okay. We're going to come back and talk a little bit more about IASB's structure, and then we'll talk a little bit about the expectations gap as well. All right? So we'll be back in a little while with that. Thanks.